Alrighty, so it's been a minute since I finished the video on week 9. It's been a weekend, and so I ended up having to refer back to what I had done on the array of objects, and I hinted then we needed to do some more refactoring. So in this video, the first part of this, we will do some of that, because as I looked at it today, and trust me, this is just part of coding, is like you code something and and I even said when I was doing this video, I kind of brute forced it. I just kind of made it happen. And what happens is when you sleep or you step away from code, which I highly recommend you do, right? So as you step away from code, because when you do something too long, you stop seeing it and you just kind of need a break. Honestly, I think we all need a break, and I think that's my point about this. It's like that was Friday when I did those 2 videos. And then I ended up having, actually, no, it was Thursday. And then Friday morning, I ended up having a very interesting conversation with ChatGDP about modern JavaScript, just to see, like, was I writing the most modern JavaScript based on its what we call domain. Like, if you know anything about ChatGDP, its its data is actually it ended its domain of data that it pulls from ended in 2021. So it's not that old, but still. But anyway, I had that chat, which was enlightening. It was very enlightening. I'm going to end up changing some things going forward, probably in week 10 about that. I'm still thinking about what we're going to do because I really want you all to write code on your own, but I know this can be a challenge. So, but more than anything, the other thing I did is Saturday I was in a 10K for at Woodward Park for Support Blue, and I had a great run time, and I had this cold and rainy, but it was totally fun. And I think my point about that more is that it is really good to just kind of get away from this stuff because it allows you to see it in a way with new eyes. And so as I looked at the ending code for that array of objects, I saw some of those things that I was concerned about in a new way. So what we're going to do is fix those first, and then I'll figure out what we're going to do next. So let's just turn our attention to the code that we ended up with. So for this work, what you're going to do is keep working in this 20 refactoring array of objects, right? Let's refactor it. So code along with me, be more refactoring. So the one thing, if you remember, and let's see, I just have this up. I don't need this so much, right? Let's see, do I have live server running? I think I do. Do I have it running somewhere? If not, no, I don't. Let me just go ahead and run that. Oh yeah, I didn't start the HTML. So let's just go here. Array of objects, refactor. There we go. Okay. So here's the state of our code right now. Here's our source. Here's the main, right? Oh, but by the way, one of the things I was chatting with ChatGDP about is the best practices for writing functions. And interestingly enough, they actually don't recommend arrow functions for everything. So I may end up changing that just as to go back to regular functions, named functions, not anonymous ones. Okay, but regardless of that, let's look at this. Now, when I was doing the objects, the array, when we were writing methods, I ended up setting up a validation function or method, and I think I'm going to do that here. I not think I'm going to. So I'm going to take this code right here, okay? And this is the code from here, right? So that does the if. So this is the validation code that I have so far, right? Right there. Okay, so I'm just going to take this code. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to set up a new variable. Const. I'm going to say is is form valid. It's going to be equal to. I'm going to pass something into it. We'll check that out in a minute, right? Okay. So here we go. Pass that into it. Oh yeah, because I had already in my code, right? So just for now, because I like it to be formatted nicely. Okay, so if I pull this code out, here, right? What if I pull that code out for a moment, right? Of course, for a moment, it's going to break my code here because here's the else. So what I really want to do is I want to say is form valid. I'm going to say is valid. Set up a const. I'm going to say is valid. I should change those variable names, but okay. And then I'm going to call. What am I going to call? I'm going to call the form is form valid. Right? Now the question would be, right? If I call that, it's got to return something, right? So what would I want to return? Okay, so if I call a function, right, here's the function itself. What would indicate, what would encode indicate if the form was valid, right? So in this case, if there's an error message on the, oh, by the way, also glad I saw this. I'm also going to need the for a moment, right? Okay. What is first let's talk, what does it need, right? It's going to need miles. It's going to need, right, when I call it, it's going to need miles. It's going to need gallons. And it's going to need price. So we're going to need those things when we call it. And we're passing them in. Now, in this case, we could keep the same names if we wanted. You often keep the same names if they're not needing to be abstracted in some ways. And in this case, they're not. So if it's true, right, I'm sorry, if the error message, right, once it goes through the logic, right, if we're pushing messages into the array, then we know that that is indeed, right, if we know the length is greater than 0, we know it is error, and then we update that content, okay, and then we could say return false, right? Now, what do we do if it's true? Do we just do else return true? Okay. And then if we say if it's true, right? If is valid. I still don't like the name, but okay. Right? If is valid. And this is the first time in this course that we've talked about that this is what we call a truthy value. Okay. If it's valid, then what do we do? Right? We're going to run a code block and we're going to run all this right here. We're going to say, okay, run all that. Which this is the next thing I'm going to refactor because I don't like it. Okay, so now when I do that, right, so I'm going to say if it's valid, then do all this work. I don't really need an else anymore because if it's not valid, it just not going to do it, which I don't want it to do anything, right? Because if it's not valid, it's already given the error message, right? It's already outputted it. It's horrible. It's already updated here, that text content, right? But I do want it to clear it. Okay, so let's actually just get correct code here. Good, right? Cool. So let's see if this works actually. Let's walk through the code. 300. Let's say 4 gallons, right? Again, that little nice trick of making this smaller just makes it a little easier to, okay, good, right? So in this case, how do we validate that this works? Is we set that breakpoint right here. We enter, right, some data that we know was not correct. What is it? We know zeros, but let's say we enter a big price here. I think this is the one that we had it trip on. Okay, so we're going to call is. I'm going to step into this function call, passing in miles, and there we go, which we know that these are not equal to 0, so we're good. But price is, we're going to say, really? And then in this case, we're going to update. There we go. We have the error message. We're going to hit the return false, right? And then we go back here. Now, is false, or is valid is false. So what happens is, remember, only if it's true is it going to run this code. If it's not, then it just drops here and it resets the form. So this is a truthy value, okay? It's the is true, is valid, right? We're setting it as a Boolean, and then we're testing for its condition. And it is, in this case, false, right? Because there was an error. Good. Okay. So that's done. We got that done. And that, I think that looks cleaner. What do you think, right? So let's actually get rid of this code now. Let's get rid of this and look how much simpler this is, right? Look how much cleaner this is. And now let's work on this problem, right? So now, why I set this object up. Do you remember why? Right, we set the object up. I then pass the object into track MPG, right? I pass it into this function call. But why did I do it? And I was just, because here's the deal. I don't actually need to do that, set up that object yet. I can just pass miles and gallons and price in here. And then instead of having this update data object, right? I really need to create it once, really. Okay, let's do that, right? So in this case, let's comment out this, okay? And what we're going to do is in here, right, we'll pass to this miles, gallons, and price. Now what has to change if we do that, right? So we have to come up to where we're tracking our costs up here. We had the object before, so now we're just going to go back to where it was a little more simple. Price, right? Okay, so this would just be miles. And notice, by the way, the editor tries to help us out, really does, by when things are off, a little color is off, that's because it's saying, hey, you haven't used that variable inside that function. Okay? You haven't used it. And now as soon as you use it in here, you're like, okay, cool. That works. So now, right? Now the question is, okay, we still are going to need to set up an object, right? What do we want to return here? Right? Because what we have, let's think about this, right? Let's think about what we're doing. Let me go back up here. As we had that object here, and we set up with these two values that we wanted to have, and then we returned the object, right? And we could still do that. Totally still do that. So like we could do this. We could say constant obj is equal to an empty object. Okay. Right? And we could do this, still do this, or we could just say, right, rather than to have those other lines, we could just say MPG. Remember me talking about how if you have the key and the value is the same, you don't have to do it, right? We could do that here, but because it's a little easier. Question is, do we still need to do this? Oh, sorry, I just saw it. Trip cost, right? So now we don't need those two lines. It's at least nicely contained. And couldn't we just do this? Couldn't we just type return, right? Yeah, we could. We could just type return there. Nice. All right, so if we type return there, we could just say, okay, I did that kind of fast. Let's go back and look at it, right? So in this case, I'm going to return a simple object with the two values that we calculated in this function. So I'm returning an object that I can then use, right? So in order for me to use that object, I then need to go down here And I said updated before, right? I could just say what here? I could say, what did I call it? I could just call it data object, make it even simpler. So my data object is going to be, right, the result of calling this, I have a new data object. But there's only one other thing I'd need to do to it, right? Now, could I do it? Where should I do it? Could I do it right here? Because I already have the other values. The answer is yeah. I already have them, right? Miles, miles, gallons, gallons, right? I already have the full object. I don't really need to do it again. Key value pairs, right? Cool. All right, so now when I return that object, I'm going to get rid of this for a minute because I no longer need it. Right? So in this case, I'm just going to call the push data object. How does that code look? That feels so much better to me. I still got to fix this. It's bugging me, but that's okay. This then returns an object that I can then use. I could have done this varying places, but my opinion about this is that it makes it more clean. I think the only other thing I would do at this point is actually change, set up a variable for the length and use it here, but maybe I'm getting picky. What do you think? Is this readable to you? Like can you read this, like look through the code and read it? Hmm. All right, so we've done, I think, a pretty good job at this point, right? So let's go ahead and just kind of halt it there for a minute and do, commit that you got working code. And it's really important because you got to know that when I grade, what I do is I go in, I pull your code and I see if it's working. That way I know if you coded along with me. And I am trying to slow down a little bit because I've gotten some feedback that sometimes I take for granted certain topics, and I'm trying to do a bit better job on this one. All right, so we'll have one more video and we'll be done with week 9.